She had everything: the mansion, the diamonds, the perfect husband. But when his private jet vanished over the Atlantic, the truth surfaced with the wreckage. Behind the empire of a billionaire was a woman no one truly saw, until the day she stopped being invisible. This isn't a story about loss. It's about what happens when silence learns to fight back. The glass walls of the Morrow mansion reflected the morning sun like a fortress of illusions. Isabela stood by the grand window, her hand resting on the cold surface, watching the city pulse below. Inside, silence ruled, not peace, but control disguised as serenity. Every inch of the house whispered of Daniel, her husband, the art he chose, the rules he set, the life he designed for her to fit into perfectly. She moved through the house like a ghost rehearsing a role. The maids smiled, the staff bowed, but none met her eyes for more than a second. Daniel's presence lingered in every corner, even when he wasn't there. He liked to say, "A beautiful wife is the reflection of a successful man." Isabela used to believe that. Now it felt like a curse: beauty without voice, comfort without freedom. That morning, Daniel prepared for another of his endless business trips. His tone was sharp, his affection practiced. "Stay away from the press," he warned, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "You have a tendency to say too much." Isabela only nodded. She had learned that silence was safer than sincerity. At breakfast, she stirred her coffee without drinking it. The marble table between them felt like a border. Daniel scrolled through his phone, talking numbers, deals, and power. His empire grew every day, yet her world never moved. She wondered when she stopped being a person and became part of his portfolio. When his driver arrived, Daniel kissed her cheek, a public gesture of devotion rehearsed for years. "I'll be back in 3 days," he said. The lie didn't matter anymore. He always returned, yet she always felt more alone. Watching his car disappear through the gates, she didn't know this would be the last time. The house felt heavier without him, not from loss, but from habit. Isabela wandered through rooms that weren't hers, surrounded by things she never chose. Her reflection stared back from polished surfaces, elegant and hollow. She whispered, "Who are you?" But the silence swallowed the question whole. Outside, the world saw perfection, the wife of a billionaire, the picture of grace. Inside, she was invisible. Every charity gala, every photograph, every speech written for her erased a little more of who she once was. The luxury that surrounded her was nothing but a cage lined with velvet. At night, she couldn't sleep. She traced the outline of Daniel's side of the bed and wondered if love could survive ownership. The city lights flickered across the window, scattering like broken promises. Somewhere out there, Daniel was conquering another deal, and she was learning the art of disappearing. By morning, the news would break. Daniel Morrow's private jet had vanished from the radar. No distress call, no survivors reported. The empire trembled, and so did she. But not for the reason everyone would assume. As the world rushed to pity the widow of a billionaire, Isabela Morrow stood at her window once more, this time not as a reflection, but as the first shadow of a woman about to rise. Chapter 2. The Disappearance. The news hit like an earthquake wrapped in silk. Every major network, every financial paper, every social feed exploded with the same headline: "Daniel Morrow missing billionaire's jet disappears over the Atlantic." Isabela's phone never stopped ringing, yet she couldn't bring herself to answer. The first hours blurred into chaos. Lawyers, reporters, investors, all demanding statements, signatures, control. Her home became a command center for panic. "You must speak to the press," the publicist urged. "Silence will look suspicious." Isabela nodded, the same mechanical motion she'd perfected. Inside, her mind was burning, but her voice remained calm. She appeared before the cameras that evening. Dressed in black, face pale but composed, she said the words they expected: "I believe my husband will return." The microphones captured her every breath. Behind the scenes, whispers spread that she seemed too calm, too rehearsed, too empty. The world loves tragedy, but it adores guilt even more. When the cameras left, so did the comfort of pretense. The mansion felt colder than ever. She wandered through Daniel's office, the one room she had never truly entered alone. The scent of his cologne clung to the air, sharp and controlling. On the desk, files lay scattered contracts, offshore documents, untraceable accounts. Something didn't fit. A faint buzz drew her attention. Daniel's phone, left behind in a locked drawer. No one knew she had found it. Inside were encrypted messages, voice notes, and one short video Daniel recorded just days before his flight, saying, "If anything happens, don't look for me." Her hands trembled, but her heartbeat steadied. She watched it again, slower this time. The background wasn't an airport or a hangar. It was their private villa in Italy. He wasn't lost. He had left. Outside, the world mourned a billionaire. Inside, Isabela realized she had married a ghost long before he vanished. The man she loved had disappeared years ago, replaced by power and deception. Now, the empire he built was collapsing, and the world expected her to fall with it. But she didn't collapse. She sat quietly, holding his phone, her reflection mirrored in the dark screen. For the first time she saw not a widow, but a woman standing at the edge of revelation, and somewhere deep inside something awakened. Not rage, not grief, just a calm, burning certainty. Daniel Morrow was alive, and Isabela would find him not to save him, but to end the story he thought he could control. The morning after the disappearance, the mansion filled with strangers wearing suits and worry. Lawyers whispered about shares, transfers, and liabilities, as if her husband's death were a boardroom inconvenience. Isabela sat quietly at the table where Daniel once commanded the room. Every man there looked past her, not at her, as though she were just another fragile ornament of the Morrow legacy. The chief financial officer slid a folder toward her. "Mrs. Morrow, the company's liquidity is unstable. We need your authorization to access Daniel's private accounts." She opened the file and saw names she didn't recognize, numbers that made no sense, and properties she'd never heard of. "Private accounts?" she asked softly. He cleared his throat. "Accounts only Mr. Morrow managed." After they left, Isabela wandered into Daniel's office again. She opened drawers she'd never dared to touch, finding a labyrinth of papers, contracts, dummy companies, and real estate titles in the names of strangers. The scent of his cologne lingered like a memory refusing to die. Each document whispered something darker. Her husband's empire had foundations built on deception. Her reflection in the office window no longer looked like the woman from the newspapers. She wasn't crying, she wasn't breaking, she was calculating. For every lie Daniel told, she wanted a truth. For every secret he hid, she would find what it meant. The first clue came from a single sheet of paper, marked with a red seal, a property deed in Italy. The same location from the video. As she stared at the paper, the city lights outside flickered like warning signs. The empire was hollow, and she was standing at its crumbling center. But instead of fear, a strange calm filled her chest. For the first time, the silence around her didn't feel like weakness. It felt like power waiting to be used. The tabloids turned on her within days. Headlines called her the icy widow, the gold queen, the woman who knows too much. Paparazzi camped outside the gates, capturing every step she took, every tear she didn't shed. Isabela learned that grief wasn't what they wanted. They wanted guilt. They wanted a woman destroyed, not one who stood tall in the ruins. Behind closed doors, the board of Morrow Holdings demanded her resignation. "It's not personal," they said, voices dripping with hypocrisy. "Investors need confidence." They thought they were protecting the empire. In truth, they were protecting Daniel's legacy and erasing hers. She signed nothing. She smiled politely. But inside, she memorized every name sitting at that table. That night, Clara Weston arrived, the only friend Isabela trusted. She looked at Isabela's pale face and whispered, "They think you'll break because you're quiet. Don't. A quiet woman is the one they should fear most." Those words stayed with her like a promise carved into her heart. Isabela wasn't ready to fight yet, but the seed had been planted. Alone later, she stood before her mirror. The woman looking back was still elegant, still soft, but her eyes had changed. The world saw fragility, but behind that calm exterior, something stronger was awakening. A woman learning that silence could be sharper than any blade. When the phone rang again, she didn't hesitate to answer. The voice on the other end was male, low and familiar. "Mrs. Morrow," it said. "Your husband wasn't the man you thought he was, and if you want to survive, you'll need to become someone else." Then the line went dead, leaving her staring into the dark, no longer the perfect wife, but a woman standing on the edge of transformation. The mysterious call echoed in her mind for days, haunting her like a whisper that refused to fade. Isabela searched every corner of Daniel's office, desperate for something that would explain the truth. Then, tucked behind a framed photograph of their wedding, she found it a letter sealed with his initials. The handwriting was unmistakable, cold, controlled, calculated. She broke the seal and unfolded the pages with trembling hands. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "it means I've done what had to be done. Don't look for me. You wouldn't survive what I'm escaping." Every line was written without remorse, every word dripping with superiority. He wasn't warning her, he was mocking her obedience. As she read on, her tears dried into resolve. Daniel spoke of offshore transfers, enemies, and a plan to restructure everything. The arrogance in his tone made her stomach twist. He believed she would crumble just as she always had. But this time, something inside her refused to break. For the first time, she saw Daniel not as her husband, but as her enemy. That night, Isabela sat alone at the piano, the same one he bought for decoration, not love. The keys felt cold beneath her fingers. Each note she played echoed through the empty mansion like a vow. She would not be his victim. If he had planned his escape, she would plan his reckoning. When dawn came, she placed the letter in a locked box and stared at her reflection in the mirror. "Don't look for me," he had said. But she smiled faintly and whispered back, "You should have told me not to find you." The next week, Isabela visited Morrow Holdings for the first time since Daniel's disappearance. The lobby was colder than she remembered, filled with men in suits pretending not to stare. Adrian Cole, Daniel's former partner, greeted her with a charming smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're brave to come here," he said softly. "The sharks smell blood." She returned his smile with polite calm. "Then let them choke on it." The boardroom went silent. Every face around the table seemed carved from the same arrogance that had ruled her life. Adrian leaned closer, intrigued. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," she replied. After the meeting, Adrian followed her to the elevator. "I can help you," he offered, voice smooth and dangerous. Daniel left behind more than debts. "I know where his money is buried." Isabela studied him carefully. His eyes glimmered with the same hunger she'd seen in her husband's. "And what do you want in return?" she asked. He smiled. "To be on the winning side." Back at home, she poured herself a glass of wine and reviewed every document Adrian had mentioned. His leads were real properties, accounts, and offshore assets Daniel had hidden under shell companies. But trusting Adrian meant stepping into the same game that had destroyed her marriage. She closed the files, her mind racing. For years she'd been a player who didn't know she was in the game. Now the board was hers, and every move she made would draw her closer to the truth and to Daniel. The difference was, this time she wasn't playing to survive. She was playing to win. The headlines were merciless. "Widow unfit to lead." Isabela Morrow, a luxury doll in a power war. Every word was a knife, and every photograph made her look smaller, weaker, more disposable. The board used public opinion as their weapon, announcing an emergency vote to remove her as interim CEO. In a single meeting, they stripped her of power, pretending it was for her protection. Isabela signed nothing. She watched their mouths move, rehearsed in greed and pity, and memorized every insult disguised as sympathy. Adrian sat silently at the end of the table, his expression unreadable. "You'll thank us later," the chairman said. "This world isn't made for women like you." She smiled faintly. "No," she said. "It's made by men like him." After the vote, she left the building through the service exit, walking into a rainstorm that blurred the city lights. Her heels clicked against the pavement, sharp, deliberate, defiant. For the first time, she didn't hide her face from the cameras. Let them see her stripped of everything. Let them record the fall, because soon they would watch the rise. That night, Clara found her in the library, drenched and trembling. "They think it's over," Isabela whispered, eyes gleaming through tears. "But it's not. They just gave me a reason." Clara saw something new in her, not desperation, but fire. "Then make them regret it," she said. When the storm finally stopped, Isabela looked out at the skyline, the city glittering with deceit and promise. She understood now. Daniel had built an empire out of control, fear, and illusion. She would build hers from truth, intelligence, and silence. A different kind of power, one that didn't need to roar to be heard. The next months turned Isabela into a ghost in plain sight. She sold her jewelry, dismissed her staff, and vanished from society pages. The world believed she had surrendered, but while the headlines forgot her, she was learning the language of power Daniel had kept hidden. Clara became her confidant, her anchor, her strategist. Together they traced Daniel's offshore accounts through a web of fake corporations. Each document she uncovered was a thread leading her closer to the truth. The more she discovered, the more she realized Daniel hadn't disappeared to escape enemies. He was the enemy. His empire was built on betrayal, and she had been his perfect cover. Adrian reappeared with new information, a list of investors who were once loyal to Daniel. "They're nervous," he said. "They'd follow anyone who can promise stability." Isabela met his gaze, expression calm. "Then I'll give them something better than promises." She began buying small shares quietly, piece by piece through intermediaries. Weeks passed, and her network grew. Every move was subtle, every risk calculated. She learned to weaponize patience, the same patience she once mistook for weakness. At night she practiced her voice, no longer soft, no longer afraid. When the time came, she would walk into Morrow Holdings, not as Daniel's widow, but as its rightful heir. Standing in the shadows of the skyline, she whispered to the city below, "You took everything from me." Then she smiled, slow and cold. "Now, I'll take everything back." The empire that once silenced her was about to hear her voice, and it would echo through every corner Daniel thought he owned. As Isabela's quiet acquisitions grew, the whispers began. Some said she was rebuilding for charity, others that she was being manipulated by Adrian Cole. She ignored them all. The truth was sharper than rumor. Adrian was helping her, but his loyalty was a currency she hadn't yet paid for. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Clara's research uncovered a disturbing link. Several of Daniel's hidden companies were registered in the same offshore accounts now tied to Adrian. When Isabela confronted him, his smile didn't waver. "Business overlaps," he said. "You can't clean an empire without touching the dirt." His charm was poison, and she knew it. Yet she needed his access. Late one night, she opened Daniel's old laptop again. The same encrypted files stared back at her, taunting. With Clara's help, she cracked one of them open, and what she saw made her stomach turn. A recording. Daniel and Adrian discussing the contingency plan. If she ever gets in the way, remove her. The words hit harder than any betrayal before. She turned off the screen and stared at the reflection of her own face, pale, calm, unflinching. They had planned her disappearance long before Daniel's. Every smile, every gift, every kiss had been strategy. But what they didn't plan was who she would become after the fall. The woman they dismissed had become the one thing they feared: unstoppable. From that moment, the game changed. She no longer sought justice, she sought control. Adrian thought he was pulling the strings, but he'd soon learn the truth. Isabela was no longer a piece on Daniel's board. She was the player setting the traps, and her next move would shatter everything they built. Daniel Morrow arrived unannounced, as if the house still belonged to her. Her perfume filled the hall before her voice did. "You've embarrassed my son enough," she hissed, sweeping through the room like royalty. "Step aside before you destroy what's left of this family." Isabela didn't rise from her seat. "What's left of this family," she said quietly, "is me." Eleanor laughed, cruel and cold. "You were never one of us. You were the decoration he chose to soften his image. Don't fool yourself, Daniel built this name, not you." But Isabela had already learned that power doesn't come from names. It comes from what people believe. And soon, the world would believe in her. Days later, Eleanor filed a lawsuit claiming Isabela was mentally unstable and unfit to handle Daniel's estate. The media devoured the story. Cameras lined the courthouse steps as Isabela walked past, calm and poised. Every reporter shouted questions, but she said nothing. Silence was her armor, and now her weapon. Inside the courtroom, Eleanor's lawyers painted her as fragile, emotional, and manipulative. Isabela waited patiently, letting them dig their own grave. When it was her turn to speak, her voice didn't shake. "You taught me that power means control," she said. "You were right. I learned from the best." The room fell silent. For the first time, Eleanor's eyes flickered with fear. When the hearing ended, Isabela walked into the sunlight surrounded by chaos. Reporters screamed her name, but she kept walking, her face serene, her eyes burning with quiet victory. That day, the world saw not a broken widow, but a woman rewriting her story. The queen had fallen, yes, but now she was building her throne. The courtroom speech changed everything. Overnight, Isabela became a symbol not of scandal, but of strength. News outlets replayed her words on every channel. "You taught me power means control. I learned from the best." The public turned. Sympathy replaced suspicion. Investors began to whisper her name again, this time with respect. Clara watched as her friend transformed under the spotlight. "You've done it," she said, but Isabela shook her head. "No, this isn't victory, not yet." Fame didn't interest her. Truth did. Daniel's empire was still operating in the shadows, money moving through invisible hands. Someone was keeping his legacy alive, and that meant he was too. She returned to Daniel's office, now hers, and sat in the chair he once ruled from. The skyline glittered beyond the window, cold and endless. "You built this world on lies," she whispered. "I'll rebuild it with honesty and make sure your name rots beneath mine." Her reflection in the glass no longer looked fragile. It looked like command. When Adrian called that evening, his tone had changed. "You're winning hearts, Isabela. That's dangerous." "For whom?" she asked. He chuckled softly. "For everyone who underestimated you." She ended the call without answering, aware his admiration was just another kind of threat. That night, as she closed her laptop, she received an email with no subject, just one sentence. "He's alive." Attached was a blurred photo of Daniel in a cafe somewhere in southern Europe. Her heart stopped. The game wasn't over. The ghost was returning, and this time she wasn't the same woman he left behind. The photo became her obsession. She zoomed in on every pixel, tracing the edges of Daniel's face as if touching a scar. It was him, older, thinner, but alive. Clara begged her to stay quiet, to let the past remain buried. But Isabela couldn't. Her entire life had been built on his lies, and now she would face the truth no matter the cost. Through discreet contacts, she traced his location to Portugal. Adrian offered to handle it, but she refused. "You don't get to own this story," she told him. "I do." Her flight left at dawn. As the plane crossed the ocean, she replayed every moment of their marriage in her mind, the manipulation, the charm, the control. This time she wouldn't look away. When she found him, it was almost anticlimactic. He was sitting outside a seaside cafe, drinking espresso as if the world hadn't collapsed around him. For a moment she simply watched him. The man who once defined her life now looked small, ordinary, forgettable. She didn't feel fear, only clarity. Power was never his to give or take. She walked toward him slowly. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Isabela," he breathed, "you shouldn't be here." She smiled faintly. "You said not to look for you," she replied. "I didn't. I came to finish what you started." Every word was steady, every movement controlled. He realized too late that the woman before him was not his creation anymore. As she left the cafe, she knew he would follow men like Daniel always did. He couldn't allow her to exist beyond his control. But this time she was ready. The hunter had become the hunted. And when he came for her, she would make sure the world finally saw who Daniel Morrow truly was and what she had become in his absence. The meeting was her idea, but she made it look like his. Daniel received the message through Adrian, an invitation written in the same elegant handwriting he once praised. Let's end this where it began. The address, the old warehouse where the first Morrow deal was signed. To him it was nostalgia, to her it was strategy. Isabela arrived first, dressed in black, her hair tied back, her expression unreadable. The vast space echoed with the ghosts of their past contracts, promises, and the silence of submission. She placed her phone on the table, recording. The device blinked softly, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Then, footsteps approached. Daniel entered with his old confidence, his smirk rehearsed. "You always did love drama," he said. She didn't move. "I learned from the master." They circled each other like predators, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You can't win, Isabela. You don't have the stomach for it." She looked straight into his eyes. "You never knew me at all." He began to talk about offshore funds, the fake crash, Adrian's betrayal, Eleanor's silence. Every word was a confession, and every second her phone captured his empire unraveling. He thought he was taunting her, but she was giving him rope. "You think they'll believe you?" he asked. She smiled. "They'll believe you." When he finally realized what she had done, his face twisted in fury. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "You're nothing without me," he shouted. But she didn't flinch. She whispered, "Then watch what nothing can do." Her hand hit the send button, uploading the recording to every major news outlet. By the time he let go, it was already too late. Chaos followed like a storm breaking glass. Within hours, the footage went viral. Daniel Morrow confessing to fraud, manipulation, and faking his death. The empire that had ruled the city for a decade began to crumble overnight. Shareholders fled. The media devoured the scandal. For once, the silence belonged to him. Daniel tried to flee, but the world closed in. His own allies turned against him, their loyalty evaporating under the weight of evidence. He cornered Isabela in the warehouse, desperation replacing his old composure. "You ruined me!" he shouted, eyes wild. "No," she said, stepping back into the light. "You did that the moment you thought I wouldn't fight back." He struck her, and she fell against the cold floor. Blood touched her lips, but she laughed, quiet, defiant. "You still don't get it," she whispered. "You can destroy everything, Daniel, but you can't destroy me." Sirens wailed outside. Blue lights flooded the room. For the first time, he looked afraid. Police stormed in as he tried to run. Officers pinned him down, reading his rights over the echoes of his empire's fall. Isabela sat motionless, her body trembling but her eyes fixed on him not with hatred but closure. The monster who ruled her life was finally human, finally powerless. As they led him away, she stood, steady despite the pain. The air smelled of rain and metal, of endings and beginnings. She looked at the empty warehouse, the place where his kingdom was born and buried. "You built your world on silence," she said softly, "and silence is what will bury it." Then she walked out into the dawn a survivor, not a shadow. Months passed. The world moved on as it always does, hungry for the next scandal. But for Isabela Morrow, silence had a new meaning, not absence, but peace. The foundation she built in her name grew quickly, helping women who had been silenced, manipulated, or erased by power. The irony wasn't lost on her. The empire Daniel built through control now funded liberation. She rarely spoke to the press, though invitations flooded in. Her story had become legend, the widow who fought the ghost. Yet she refused the spotlight. She didn't need the world's validation anymore. For the first time, her reflection belonged only to her. Each morning, she stood before the mirror, not as Daniel's wife, nor as his widow, but as herself. One evening, she returned to the old piano, the same one that had once echoed her loneliness. This time, her hands didn't tremble. The notes filled the room with warmth instead of pain. Clara entered quietly, smiling. "You look free," she said. Isabela nodded, eyes distant. "Freedom isn't given," she replied softly. "It's taken and earned." When she checked her mail that night, a single unmarked envelope waited on her desk. Inside was a bank statement, an offshore transfer made just days earlier from one of Daniel's hidden accounts. The sender's name was blurred, but the message attached read, "He wasn't the only one." The calm she had built began to ripple. The ghost she buried had company. Isabela stood at the window, the city alive beneath her. Power, deception, redemption, they were all part of the same dance. She had survived one storm, but another was coming. A faint smile touched her lips. "Let them come," she whispered. "This time, I'll be waiting." The lights of New York shimmered in her eyes, not as reflections of fear, but of a woman who stayed. In the end, she didn't need to destroy him. He destroyed himself. All she did was survive, and that was enough. Tell me, what would you have done in her place? Would you forgive or let the empire burn? If her story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones we almost never hear.